Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is a ministry out of Theology by the Pint, which is every month gathering of in-person, real-life human beings, IRL, who gather around craft beer and interesting conversations rooted in morality and kind of politics and theology, of course, philosophy. So this is the podcast version of that gathering because we have so much to talk about. We can't possibly do it all in our in-person episodes, gathering. So we do this podcast, and White Pill Radio is the version of Theology on Air where we look at current events from a Christian worldview. We are post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful, applied theology, and I like to say that this is blessed talk, but not happy talk. So we want to look at the substantive issues of the day. So we actually did a special White Pill Radio last week because of the assassination attempt and all the changes in politics that are just going. I mean, we've never lived probably through a news cycle like this, where every day it seems like we can't cover it all. And one of the things that people said, that's a very passive way of saying that, but people said that we were kind of all for kind of pro-Trump on that episode. So we wanted to do our best to mix it up and get other points of view. So we do have Cody with us today, and I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a sec. But first, I want to remind you, go to theologybythepint.org, theologybythepint.org. Learn more about us, our future events, how you can donate to the cause. You know, I think we put our own commercial on these episodes, but, we're not selling ourselves out. We're not monetizing on YouTube. We do this strictly through donations, and it's a lot of work, so I certainly make nothing from it. But anyway, do help out Theology by the Pint. Go to the website, see how you can donate. It would sure be appreciated. And Sarah, sadly, is on vacation, so the Grand Poobah is not here, but fortunately, a familiar face and voice to you, podcast listeners and viewers, Mace Perez, is here. He's sitting in the Grand Poobah chair. He is Grand Poobah in residence for the day. So, Mace, glad to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm Mace, and I serve on the outreach team for Theology by the Pint, and I'm a church planter and pastor in the Houston area. Recently planted a church called the Journey Church Houston in the Heights. We are officially 3 months old, almost to the day.
Cool.
As of right now.
Good deal. And what's your website?
thejourneyhouston.org.
Excellent. Okay, and Cody, we're just throwing you in the hot seat. Yeah. So I appreciate you coming in. Introduce yourself and maybe say how you found us.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name's Cody Pogue. I'm a professor at a local community college. This is my first time. A little bit nervous, but they promised they're not going to be too mean to me.
No.
So I'm happy to be here. I had a mutual friend with Sarah who recommended me, so here I am.
Good deal. Glad to have you. And if I stand up, I might go over to the computer and check levels. So just ignore that. Keep talking. Okay, well, let's just kind of jump in. We, if you don't mind me saying, Cody, we wanted to be sure that you could be here and on future episodes because a lot of us tend to sort of be in the conservative, Christian camp, and you maybe to our political left a little bit. So we wanted to definitely have you on and have a mixture of views. I guess the news of the week is that Kamala Harris, I hope every time I say her name, I'm like, did I say it wrong? Anyway, but she is more or less, I guess, running for president. Right. President Biden stepped down this week, and everyone's endorsed her. She got the phone call from Michelle and Barack today that was released, so they're on board.
Totally not staged.
That was not staged at all. That was totally legit. And by the way, if you're on speaker, you don't have to hold the phone up to your ear. I'm just saying. Right. Anyway, but give us your thoughts on the change and what you think about her candidacy and what excites you or doesn't.
Oh man, I'm excited. I joked, somebody asked me if I was excited. I said, I'm happier than a flea at a dog show because, for the last year, we've just kind of been like, it's inevitable. Donald Trump is going to be the next president. Joe Biden, he can barely make it through a sentence. And nobody ran against him. In the primary, we wanted somebody to run against him. But the tradition is that you don't run against the incumbent. So we didn't have any, we would consider really serious candidates against him.
Yeah, there was that one guy, Dean Phillips or something.
Yeah, there was a couple people, but nobody that was real, like a serious contender that we could really take seriously. So, we all went down and voted for him, held our nose and voted Biden because we didn't have any choice. But it was like, it's inevitable. Trump's going to win. Everything we care about in politics, we're going to lose over the next 4 years. And it's just because of Biden's age. But then he did really poorly in the debates, and it kind of made it obvious to everybody what a lot of us have been saying all along. And so at that point, a lot of the big donors and all those people were like, we're not going to donate. The faithful volunteers are like, we're not going to volunteer. And eventually I think Biden had to, read the writing on the wall and go ahead and step down. And I see some people are trying to make a big deal out of it, like Kamala got anointed or something like that. But, the reality is when we voted, we were voting for the Biden-Harris ticket. And if Biden steps down, then Harris takes over. That's, so that's how it's always been.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what's expected. So yeah, I'm excited about her. I supported her in 2020. I started out supporting Bernie, but then I took one of those quizzes where it asks you like 50 questions.
They work?
And yeah. And it said I was like 98% with Kamala and like 92% with Bernie. So I was like, let me find out what she actually stands for. And I started looking into it, and she has a positive vision of the future. She supports kids and investing in childcare and good education, making college affordable, single-payer healthcare, and a lot of programs that I really support. So I'm excited to see her on the ballot.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think I disagree with her about everything, but that's no surprise there.
The 2%, that's Evan.
Yeah. Well, Bernie is, he is kind of a left-wing populist, whereas Trump is kind of a right-wing populist. So I can actually see if you're really opposed to populism, then that you would be more in line with Kamala. I mean, to me, she does kind of represent an archetypal liberal. I mean, she was named the most liberal senator not that long ago, and then they apparently scrubbed that from her website, which is kind of interesting. So it's like, is this 1984 land where we're editing information in real time? But if you hold all the liberal policies, then it would make sense that you would go with her. So it doesn't. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter to me that no one actually voted for her. I understand it's an unusual circumstance, but it does feel a little bit like, I mean, they could have had something like some open convention or something where people could have done it, but they probably need to get a move on in a hurry. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I don't really buy into the notion of them. I think it was just nobody wanted to run against her. Like, I mean, what are we, like 3-4 months away from the election? Yeah. The idea of starting a campaign from scratch right now, if I was Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or somebody, like that would just be overwhelming. People start like 2 years ahead of time. So, I mean, it makes sense that nobody would even jump in the race.
Yeah.
So.
And there's like a financial concern, like all the money Joe Biden raised will go to her because they're on the same ticket, whereas it wouldn't go to other people. Although my guess is they could figure that out if they really wanted to.
Right.
And I think maybe to a degree, some people may not want to run this year because they see a longer future. And I mean, I will say that Trump has never been in a better position polling wise. No guarantees.
Last week he was. It's changing a little bit this week.
Yeah, there's definitely been a bump, which is kind of crazy because we did a whole show, in the wake of the assassination attempt, and that's like old news. Yeah. Things are changing so fast, and but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What are there any specifics? I mean, you mentioned some specific policies. I do try to tie things to our Christianity. Are there some of her policies that I guess she or the Democrat Party kind of, really holds to that you would say really especially aligns with your Christian beliefs?
Yeah, certainly. I'm probably different than a lot of, Christian people because I really focus on the economics. When I look at the Gospels, when I look through the Bible, I don't see any verses that say, and y'all are theologians, so y'all might disagree, but I don't really see anything that says make same-sex marriage illegal. I don't see anything that says make abortion illegal or anything that even is really against abortion. I know you can kind of extrapolate, the Bible says that I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb, but I think that could really say I knew you before I formed the universe, right? I don't know that verse is about abortion. No verse in the Bible that says to hang up the 10 Commandments in the classroom. No verse that says to put prayer in school. And actually, Jesus said, when you pray, do it in your prayer closet. Don't do it out in front of everybody. But, when a rich young ruler went to Jesus and said, what do I have to do to follow you? Jesus said, sell all you have and give it all to the poor, and then you'll have treasures in heaven. His first message was, the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, healing to the sick. The acceptable year of the Lord, that's the year of Jubilee. flee when debts are forgiven. And so when I look through scripture, there's something like 5,000 verses in the Bible that say some form of love your neighbor or help those who are in need. So when Kamala wants to pass policies that make it to where working people get a fair wage, or safe job sites, they get to come home at the end of the day, or paid time off so that they can raise their kids instead of having the video games raise their kids, or access to quality health care or child care. All of those different types of programs that invest in working people, invest in science and technology and medicine, all of those sort of things. To me, my Christian faith calls me to support those kind of policies. Whereas Trump, really doesn't. He's more of like, let's give tax cuts to rich people and hope that the money trickles down and that they do the right thing. But, we've been saying it since the 80s, and I'm still waiting for the money to trickle down, and when we can have government invest in science and technology, or we can have business do it. But business is always focused on what's going to make me the most money. And sometimes that naturally lines up with what's best for the people. But sometimes it doesn't. And we need government to step in and invest in our future. So, I really kind of see that as being part of our Christian faith.
Yeah. I want to come back to some of those points, but I'm just curious, like, were you raised like in a Christian home?
I was.
Was it a conservative home? I mean, odds are it was, but not necessarily.
So it's interesting. My mom was pretty conservative. My dad, he's when it comes to social issues, not so much. He was a union man, and he always said he'd hold his nose and vote for the Democrats because they support the working people. They support the union. Kind of.
I got you. I mean, when did you kind of come to what were some books you read or some people you listened to that kind of made you go, but I guess if your dad was already Democrat.
Yeah, well, there was already that. It was really the 2004 election. Kind of the big turning point was I didn't support
Bush Kerry.
Yeah, I didn't support the war in Iraq. And
Good for you. I did. I was wrong.
Yeah. And like everything I saw was like, yes, what happened on 9/11 was wrong, but Iraq had nothing to do with that. And so I didn't understand why we were going into that war. And there was that. There was also the environment. My grandpa had a farm. I grew up around nature. We used to go on trips to state parks and all that sort of thing. My dad was a union guy. And then the 2004 election, this is kind of what ultimately, getting way off of this.
That's all right.
But it's kind of what ultimately stopped me from going to church regularly was 2004. Everybody was just like, Bush is the Christian candidate. You can't be a Christian unless you vote for George W. Bush. And I remember we had an evangelist at our church one night, and he said, God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. And just like God spoke to Moses through a burning bush, God is speaking to us through a burning bush. The man in the White House is God's burning bush speaking to us.
Whew, that's a stretch.
Right. Yeah. And in the 2004 election, that was just, and I just couldn't support that. So I was a rebel because I was young. So I voted for Ralph Nader in 2004. I wasn't quite Democrat.
I got you. Yeah.
But yeah, so that was kind of my big turning point was that.
Yeah, I would actually say, I do think the parties have shifted quite a bit. I don't think there's a working class emphasis in the Democrat Party. In fact, there's a book, I hope to read it soon. It's called Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women by Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's been on a lot of shows recently. She's a Democrat who was an anti-never-Trumper who is full on board with the MAGA agenda, and precisely because the moneyed elites in both parties actually do not give the working man a voice. And the populist candidate actually does that much better. So I don't think it's true that the only the rich are getting tax cuts. The middle class got the biggest tax cut in history in many respects. So I think, and it's the Trump tax cuts that are actually going to expire if he loses, in 2025. And even Trump said, Biden's like the only guy on earth who's running a campaign saying, I'm going to raise your taxes. So, and that's on everyday people. They hired 80,000 new IRS agents. They're going after somebody's taxes, so actually I'm kind of disgusted with both parties. And I don't think we're represented hardly at all. I'm not even sure we have fair elections. So I know this is White Pill Radio, but I'm a little black pill some days. Yeah.
And that's kind of my take on this whole thing is I know you said you don't understand why people are making such a big deal that she's basically being anointed or, crowned. And I think that's exactly why, is at least, generally speaking, at least there's an illusion of democracy. And I find it a bit ironic that the political party that is named after democracy is doing this in a completely undemocratic way. I mean, as I was reading an AP article about it, it talked about how the process, and this was before like Kamala had gained as many delegates as possible, that the process now becomes Kamala or whoever else lobbying delegates. Mm-hmm. That it's literally what people have been complaining about, and being labeled conspiracy theories, that our nation is being run by these elites having backdoor conversations, having private conversations. That's literally exactly how this went down. That Biden went from, at one point, I believe, saying that he would support an open convention, to immediately endorsing Kamala. The Obamas, I know we kind of joked about it earlier, but they basically did the same thing in About Face, where Obama said, I know that they're going to come up with a fair process. Well, apparently the fair process was Kamala making a bunch of phone calls and a bunch of rich donors saying, no, this is what we're going to do. And so it seems to corroborate that probably both parties, to be fair, but at least the Democratic Party and how they're going about this, is not for the sake of the common people. It is the rich elites that are pulling all the strings behind closed doors.
But at the same time, if the delegates didn't want that, the delegates could have said no. And the delegates are regular people. They're people who went to the convention and ran for a position. They are people more involved in the party, but they're not rich elites. They're, from every neighborhood around the country. And so they could have at any point said, nope, we don't like this. We're going to stop it. But they haven't. So, regular people have a voice in it still.
Yeah, but who's having all those conversations with those delegates?
Right.
And I don't know what the number of delegates is, but I think it's a smaller number. But I would want to be
somewhere around 1,000 or so.
Yeah, but that's not a lot of people. But
right.
Well, and between our last episode and this one, which is only a week apart, there was the Biden resigned. I don't think that had happened when we last went live, and that was done in such a bizarre way, and it did lead to a fair amount of conspiracy theories that he was already dead and things like that. And then he did board a plane, and he did make that speech the other night. But that was so weird. I mean, you said that you were happy about it, but did it not strike you as odd that this letter with no letterhead, with no public address, no photograph, just basically it's like a tweeting a breakup letter, which is ironic, by the way, that it went out on Twitter because they hate Elon Musk and they went to war with they used to use X and shadow banning people and throttling people down and all that. I mean that's what the Twitter files revealed. So it's ironic that that's the vehicle that they used. But what did you think about that?
Hey guys. Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythePint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
It didn't really bother me. Like I say, what's bothered me more was the front side of it. The side that Biden was our only choice in the primary. Yeah. That's the part that seemed undemocratic. Yeah. But again, why? It's because nobody else chose to run. It wasn't people behind the scenes. I mean, I'm sure there were people behind the scenes pressuring, saying, don't you run. But if somebody would have chose to, they could have.
Understood.
And with this other one, if somebody would have chose to run, they could have. If the delegates would have said, no, we're not voting for her, we're voting for Gavin Newsom, they could have.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was pressure along the way, but there wasn't any this is how it's going to be and there's no way around it. So,
Yeah. There was something you mentioned and I wanted to get back to it, about some of her attributes or some of her policies that you really liked. You know, you had mentioned abortion. Obviously, I'm pro-life, but I have to say the Democrats and Republicans agree on over 90% of abortions because most abortions take place under, 12 weeks. And when J.D. Vance, who is supposedly Catholic, agrees that mifepristone, that's not the right name for it, but that they can allow, that he is okay with abortion drugs being given to women to abort their own children without even so much as a doctor being present. I find that incredibly disturbing. The Republican Party has sort of abandoned that issue, and I don't like that at all. But there are other issues. Sorry, that was a long way of saying there are some other issues that you had mentioned. I can't recall what they were now, but you're something about
healthcare, childcare.
Okay, yeah, one party
education.
pair. Yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah. Oh man, each one of those is its whole thing, and I think you're going to be on the panel in October. Am I giving away too much? Sorry, I can edit that out if I need to. Okay, but we are having a kind of who should you vote for in October, and so you'll be there for that. Cool. So maybe some of these issues can be a little bit more fleshed out. So to our listeners, come to that event or look forward to listening to that event.
I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, let's keep going.
Well, before we move on, I just forgot to mention earlier, just talking about the lack of democracy being displayed. I've found it humorous that one of the organizations calling out how undemocratic this process was BLM, the Black Lives Matter organization, which I just kind of found it pretty ironic that I think it's one of the rare times, maybe the only time, that those of us that lean more conservative have found ourselves agreeing with something that Black Lives Matter put out.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they. In fact, let me pull that up here. And I don't know that this was the national group. I'm fairly certain it was probably like a more local version of Black Lives Matter. I don't know. Is that what is that Twitter address? It says it looks at BLK Lives Matter. So it looks they got a blue check mark. But they go through kind of a timeline where Joe Biden drops out. Harris announces campaign with Biden endorsement. It was very fast.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a 24-hour process. So it's kind of what we've already talked about. But they're saying that there is an installation of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee and unknown vice president. I think one of the things that troubles me most about this, and I don't know why it does or should, because it's like so rote at this point, but to oppose Kamala Harris and her many very liberal policies is now to become a sexist and a racist. And I mean, can I at least hear from someone that, like, you understand that, like, I could oppose her policies without being a sexist and a racist, right?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. This is a part of, I don't want to call it like the Democratic Party, but like online liberal culture. It's this kind of like call everybody racist and sexist and, all the names and all that sort of thing. To me, politics is much more about policy. We want to pass good laws that leave a better world to the next generation. Yeah. And calling people names online, it just doesn't really contribute to that. It's divisive, and it's one of those things. I see it from both sides, but certainly it's a problem on the liberal side with the online keyboard warriors. Who just want to call names. So.
Yeah, well, it gets old and it gets frustrating because there is this constant push to basically shield people from criticism because of. But it's like, I'm sorry, Kamala Harris entered the arena. Yeah. She's been in politics for almost 30 years, and she has ideas about things, and she has said things, and I have the right as a citizen to criticize her, and I will not be called a racist because I do so. Yeah. Also, I don't care that she's black. Sorry, I don't care that she's a woman either, and I'm entitled to that point of view. Certainly. That's not a crazy point of view. Being black doesn't give you better ideas or worse ideas. Same for being a woman. So why it's just, in fact, there was a podcast segment I watched this morning, and it was an all black podcast, and it was like 12 people on this kind of Zoom call that they put out as a podcast, and I can't remember the name of it. I apologize, but there was a young black woman, and she said, well, I'm voting for her because she's a black woman. And so the guy kind of said, well, yes, but she is in favor of this. The borders are, that we didn't even talk about immigration. And now they're kind of like in this very 1984 world. Oh, no, she was never the borders are. Oh, no, she was never in charge of this. Oh, no, she was never in charge of that. I mean, come on. And it's like, are we like, how long do we have to be committed to identity politics?
Right.
Like, when is it over? I mean, Barack Obama was elected president. I thought that was the end of that.
Right.
You know, and she has been vice president. Okay, we've never had a female president. Okay, we've had a female everything else.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, when can we put that to the side? You know?
Right. Yeah. On some level, I can say that I see the benefit of it, even though I agree with you. This shouldn't be the only reason you support somebody. But I do see the benefit of, young girls being able to look at somebody in the White House and say, oh, I can do that because, up to now, you look at that chart in elementary school and you see all these guys, and it kind of, unintentionally does send a little bit of a message like, those people can be the president. You can't, because look at those pictures. So, I think there is something to it. But at the same time, I will be totally honest. If Sarah Palin was the candidate, I wouldn't be voting for her.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think that makes me a sexist any more than it makes you a sexist for not supporting Kamala Harris.
Or Condoleezza Rice, for example.
Right. Yeah, I think it comes down to good policies, and I think that's the ultimate thing we're looking for.
Yeah, well, that would be good if we could get back to policy debates. I would like that. But it seems like as a nation, it's almost like we're too dumb for that. That's what it honestly feels like. It's like our political discourse is so dumb, and it is so low IQ. Not that I'm a high IQ person, but like it is just so banal. It is so boring. And it's like, I mean, I don't watch cable news for this reason. It's incredibly boring. I feel dumber having watched it because everything is just so superficial. I mean, what I'd like to do is talk about Christian worldview. What are the things that Christians actually believe? What are the limits to, what are our ethics? What are the laws that we want to, promote or not promote? And then how does that kind of find its way out in an imperfect Republican little r system? Or Republican Democratic or Constitutional Republic or Democratic Republic, whatever you want to call it. But this process that we have, how does the Christian worldview get matriculated out, into the culture, but also into politics and policies? That's an interesting conversation. But a lot of what goes on is, well, she's a black woman. Well,
yeah,
I don't find that.
And I think part of it is the media, and not like the conspiracy theory stuff where, there's manipulating behind the scenes. But it's a business, right? And the more views you get, the more money that you make. I even experienced this because I'm on TikTok. Everybody should follow me on TikTok.
All right. What's your handle?
Cody Pogue.
Cody Pogue.
My name.
Pogue.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but a struggle that I notice is sometimes I will make a post that I really researched, and I'm talking about history, and I looked up my facts, and I will put time into it, and it will get 100 views. And I'm like, that's it. But then I will make a post saying, can you believe Greg Abbott did this dumb thing?
Yeah.
And I will talk bad about, whatever. And that one will get 100,000 views.
Wow.
And so it's like the whole, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's something that's divisive, that's going to divide people, it's going to get all the views. If it's something that's smart, it's not going to.
I hear you.
So
I believe the data out there says that the posts that incite anger are the ones that get the most traction.
Yes.
And news articles, social media, etc.
YouTube videos. Yeah. YouTube's algorithm is kind of wild because they will end up putting you down conspiracy theory paths if you just kind of continue to follow the algorithm. It's kind of like on Wikipedia. It's like any topic will eventually get back to philosophy, right? So like it might be 14 clicks away, it might be 5 clicks away, but every topic eventually gets back to philosophy. So
everything started with philosophy.
Right.
Well,
It's
exactly.
almost like presuppositions matter.
Well, it is like presuppositions matter. Okay, Mace, let's hear the good news, or is it the bad news? Anyway, the news.
I don't know. Yeah, so definitely news. I don't certainly wouldn't call it good news necessarily, though I guess we can. This is White Pill Radio, so maybe we can find something out of this. I just thought this was interesting. I'm still honestly formulating my thoughts on it, and there's a lot that I don't know, so I'm withholding judgment largely. But this article is from AP News, and it is the headline is, "As a scholar, he's charted the decline in religion. Now the church he pastors has closed its doors." So we've mentioned Ryan Burge before on this podcast. I don't follow him super closely, but he's a sociologist that he's kind of, his claim to fame is he's taken all this data, especially related to religion in America, and helped put it in easy to understand charts. And so he's become real popular. He's kind of become a guru on religious decline in America. He wrote a book called The Nuns, Nones, which is about people that claim no specific religious affiliation. So he's kind of seen as this guru of decline in church in America, and someone that people are looking to try to figure out how to turn that around. And so this article is pointing out that in an interesting turn of events, the church that he has been the pastor of since 2006 in rural Illinois, First Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, just had their final service on July 21st. He grew the church from 50 members down to 10 during his 18 years as tenure as pastor. And so it's just an interesting case study in this gentleman, and I don't know him personally. Like I said, I don't even follow him super closely. But someone who's seen as an expert is now living it in real time. And you can see as you read this, I read another article that was more that he actually wrote, kind of detailing his own personal experience with it, and just the wrestling that he has of how much of this is his failure as a pastor, how much of this is the larger cultural things at play. But I thought it was an interesting article.
I have lots of thoughts about all this, but as a pastor of a small church that also had a high point probably in the 40s or 50s, we were a German immigrant church, so there was no shortage of people who were coming from Germany and populating, looking for a church home in the 1800s, and then they had their children, and they didn't move, they didn't go anywhere. I mean, once you're somewhere in the 1800s, you pretty much stay there, and you have more than the 1.7 children we have. They had big families, and so there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And then we had church splits, we had suburban growth, white flight, all that kind of stuff. And so this whole neighborhood that we're in as we sit here totally changed. And so, for us, I mean, it's like he said in 2006, he said 50 people was a good Sunday, and I'm at like 60 to 70 is like a good Sunday. And so we have new people join, but other people leave for whatever reason. Sometimes they move to Dallas for some reason. I still hadn't figured that one out. Like, hello.
Lame.
But it's kind of funny how, there are these pastors out there who are like really good at social media, or like they're really good scholars, and like he could like he's like an expert in charting, like, like American culture, but his own church is like dying, or there are people who have like hundreds or thousands of followers on blank social media, but their own church is small, so that's there's kind of an irony in that. And I don't really know the area. I have come to the conclusion that there isn't a lot we can do, and I don't want to be black-pilled about that. But I just think that there are social forces that there's only so much that we can do to bring people into the church. I mean, I think that the Christian church has been trying, for decades. They've talked about discipleship. They've made that a core identity. We're not members anymore, we're disciples. That's like a big thing in the Lutheran world, and I'm sure other denominations as well. We've got the whole contemporary movement, megachurch movement, church growth movement. I mean, Rick Warren's entire modus operandi is like, figure out your demographic and go target, market them to the max, and there's 1,000 other mini Rick Warrens out there, I mean, you're a church planner, so you tell me, I mean, a good friend of, a friend of mine, I think he's a pretty good friend of mine. He's a church planner, and he and I would have talks about this as well. Like, and I would kind of be like, well, my church is like really small and we struggle to stay alive. Like, do we need more churches? Because then there's like, well, there's the number of people going to church seems to be getting smaller, but a church planter is adding more churches. And his argument was, yeah, but we're going to get people who wouldn't go to church otherwise, because, and sometimes that's the best way to grow is just to start new. Like, it's really hard to get people to come to an old church, because they think I don't know. Maybe they think our roof leaks or something, but the people are maybe cranky. And sometimes that happens at older churches. So I don't know. What do you think? You studied this?
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert. Certainly, we asked and have been asked that question, certainly planting in Houston. I will say, I mean, we specifically moved into the Loop to plant because there seemed to be overtly a higher need for more churches than out in the burbs where we were before. Though I'm not saying that the suburbs don't need more churches, but we said we want to be where there's clearly a need, and certainly in our neighborhood in the Heights, there's an increasing number of historic church buildings that are empty or nearly empty. There are an increasing number of historic church buildings that are no longer housing churches. And so I tell people, in our community, there's some wonderful churches, but we need more. All the more so because our neighborhood, at least, is becoming increasingly population dense. I have been saying since we moved in 2 years ago, it seems like for every old bungalow in the Heights that wasn't necessarily kept up over the years, it gets torn down and a bunch of townhomes get put in their place. And that I've been saying that since we moved in 2 years ago. Well, not that long ago, the lot right next to our house got sold, and that is what is going on. It's like, see, this is what is going on. So it's just, I go on walks. We live really close to the Nicholson Trail that goes through our community, and I go on walks and I'm just astounded at the population density. But in terms of broadly speaking, just why plant churches, Tim Keller has a famous article out there on this, and his basic thesis is twofold. One, that church plants tend to be evangelistically more effective than established churches, according to the research, that they experience a higher percentage of their growth from actual conversion growth, not transfer growth. And then secondly, that planting churches and being involved with church planting tends to be a mechanism of revitalization of existing churches. And I know we saw that when we moved into the city. We spent a year just wanting to plant roots in the city. And I did a church planting residency with another church here inside the Loop. And us being there, and they're a church that has been about church planting ever since they were born. It says they started about 12 years ago, something that they wanted to be a part of. Well, us being a part of the congregation for that year, getting ready to be sent out, prompted them to have conversations and continue to put this idea that we should live on mission as Christians all the time. But it's easy to become complacent with those things over time as you become more established. And I would say, we're still a very small church, but the people that we are seeing, there's a couple things going on. The people that we're seeing, some have never been a member of a church before. Some of them have never, or it's been a very, very long time since they've been a member of a church. Well, there's something about our church, even if it was a personal relationship, there's something about the fact that this is our church, that we were starting a church that God has used to get them over that hump. And now they're taking their faith more seriously. They're growing in their faith. They're talking to other people about their faith. And I would say the other category of people that we're seeing, there's kind of two other categories. One is the people that, well, they're both versions of people that we sought to reach, that we want to preach the gospel to everybody. Our heartbeat behind our church was one, my faith story is that I was a skeptic before coming to faith, and have spent a lot of time around the seeker-sensitive movement and churches influenced by the Rick Warren model and things like that, and just burdened that the Mace Perez of 20 years ago would never step foot in your church because of XYZ that you're doing, or these people that I'm like Evan, I'm a classical musician by background, and there's a lot of the nuns in that world. And so names, faces, people that I know and love that would never step foot in a church that I had been a part of before. And so we wanted to reach people like that, and we're seeing traction. We're seeing people that grew up very skeptical, that like our approach to trying to commend the reasonableness of the faith, the beauty of the Christian story. And I would say the other people that we're seeing are particularly, I think, millennial, and definitely even more so Gen Z, is kind of tired of the seeker-sensitive approach and just the put on the show and try to outworld the world. I think
You think there's finally some pushback to that?
I
I
think,
shouldn't say finally, but it
yeah,
feels like
no, I
finally.
absolutely think there is, and so that we're seeing some people really resonate with what we're trying to do, and not disparaging any church, other churches, and how they're doing things, but that we're so just to use, I'll just share one example. I know I'm talking a while now, but like when it comes to music, most Sundays it is me at the piano, and I am not piano is not my primary instrument, but our philosophy of music at our church is we want the primary instrument to be the combined voices of the congregation. So me or anybody else who's helping lead our musical portions of our service are there to serve our congregation and support congregational singing. So we're not trying to make it sound like the CD. What we're trying to do is provide enough rhythm and enough harmonic structure that people can feel comfortable and confident raising their voices to the Lord.
Yeah. There's I know I've said it on the show before, but years ago I was talking to someone, young lady, like, what church are you going to? She named a big church in town that I won't name. And she said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to a different church. I said, well, why? She said, well, their contemporary music is kind of like 1990s, and it's like, wow, that's how, once you get in that mindset of like things change so fast, it's like even contemporary music that has a 1990s style is like old fashioned,
right?
And so there's the edgier, the Hillsong, I guess, and I don't know, Hillsong will be replaced maybe, since it's maybe falling apart, by something else, But back to this article, he says something that's interesting. He says he can offer some consolation to other pastors in similar circumstances. He says, this is not all your fault. In the 1950s, you could be a terrible pastor and probably grow a church because there was just as much growth happening all across America. Now it doesn't look like that anymore. And if you basically do look at the 50s, for example, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is a conservative Lutheran, body, tripled in size in the 1950s. So you had the baby boom, obviously. You had suburban, either it was white flight or just suburban sprawl. You had post-war optimism. I mean, we kind of laugh about the 50s maybe, but it wasn't a perfect time by any means, but it was pretty amazing. I mean, tremendous optimism, tremendous growth. You had big families. You had towns were, suburbs were building faster than, they could shake a stick at, right? And so therefore we had churches like going in. And so when you have a denomination that had been around for like over, at that point, about 100 years or more, they triple in size in one decade. That should tell you a lot. Well, that kind of growth is not sustainable. And eventually the kids born, in the late 40s and 50s, the baby boomers, I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before, the baby boomers. But anyway, in the 60s, they grew up, and they became teenagers, and they went off to college, and they learned about things, and they protested Vietnam, and they began to hate institutions, and like everything changed. JFK was assassinated. That's for you, Sarah. I have to mention that every episode. So there was a cynicism that set in the middle and later half of the 60s that kind of undid a lot of the optimism of the 50s. But you're stuck with like all these buildings. Now, they didn't just die all at once. It wasn't until 65, though, was the high point of American religious attendance. 1965. So it's kind of been downhill ever since. But it wasn't until like the 80s that I think people were like noticing like, oh, this is like a trend. This is not going to be easily fixed. And, pastors would notice more of their members whose children wouldn't come to church. And then their children or their grandchildren didn't come to church. And so, we're now maybe into great-grandchildren, at this point. So there's been this kind of change, going on. And I will say this too, as a young pastor, of course I have great respect for my elders, many of whom had, tremendously successful ministries and very faithful ministries. But sometimes I want to tell them, I wish I could have ministered in your day, sorry. But it's like, there was a culture that supported church going. There was a social pressure that supported it. There was not underpopulation like we're dealing with, but overpopulation. That's not the right phrase. I hate overpopulation. There was a lot of families. Okay, a lot of families, a lot of kids, a lot of baptisms to be done, a lot of youth groups, a lot of family services to provide for. There was a need for churches, and I do think there's some truth to the fact that very average pastors came off like looking like these incredible, talented what have yous, because the culture around them just supported these robust ministries. And that's just not where we're at. And yet it's hard for us, especially as Americans, but as prideful men, to not look at smaller ministries and go, what am I doing wrong? And I'm at the point where I'm not content to just let things slide. I could go into some detail about things we do to kind of reverse the flow or reverse the stem, but I'm not content. But at the same time, like, there are biblical examples, the Elijahs of the world, the Jesuses, the
Right.
apostles, who are doing ministry in very tough circumstances, who didn't just snap their fingers and, see success. So,
Yeah, I think maybe that's the white pill angle on this article, is that it's easy, and you see him wrestling with this, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I a failure? But I think we have to evaluate our definition of success, right?
Yeah.
And make sure, is it really shaped by the Bible? So to your point, if you look at the preachers throughout Scripture, definitely think Jesus, the Old Testament prophets for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like most of the Old Testament prophets, I don't think the quote unquote church exists in the Old Testament. That's another conversation for another day. But it seemed like their congregation, so to speak, tended to shrink rather than grow. But that's not how God measures faithfulness or success. He measures it by faithfulness. So are we preaching the gospel? And I would hope that I know this article got me, continue to think, even as a church planter, a very new church that has a lot of evangelistic aspirations, it got me to ask, like, man, are we doing everything within our human power to get the gospel out, to reach people, et cetera?
Yeah. So just to kind of put in a little bit of my more liberal angle. First of all, one thing I see, I spend too much time on TikTok. And one of the criticisms I see is a lot of people, we call them ex-evangelicals, right? And one of the criticisms is this feeling that we were manipulated in the youth group back in high school, that we went off to the church camp and everything was designed to create this emotional experience. And, it's weird that God only shows up when there's a key change in the music, right? Like, we're all just normal, then a key change happened and suddenly the presence of God is here. Was it God or was it the music, right? And that sort of thing. And the fact that, there was this push to like commit everything in your life when you're 14 years old and don't really have all of and so then when you're 22, you start thinking about it and you're like, what was going on, right? And so I see a lot of bitterness about that. But I also think there's a big branding problem. And somebody at a small church, I just don't know how much power you have over it. But I see people associating Christianity with kind of two things: Donald Trump and the Joel Osteens and prosperity gospel preachers of the world. The church is out to take all of our money and force us to vote for Donald Trump. And those are kind of the two messages that I really see. And I feel like if the church could get away from those two things, then I think it would open the door up for a lot of people who just have completely closed the door on Jesus because they don't like those two things. And as a small church, I don't know how you say, no, we're not like Joel Osteen, we're not like Donald Trump. But
I mean, again, I don't claim to be an expert, but how we're seeking to go about this. So, I was on a church staff, but I was not making a lot of the major decisions in like COVID and things like this. Right. But now, I'm one of the pastors. So when things come up, my co-pastor Stephen and I have to process like, okay, is this something that we mentioned in our Sunday service? How do we do that? And we've kind of landed on, more often than not, the way, if we feel led to comment on or I shouldn't even say comment, bring up a current event, the way that we have tended to do it most often so far is through a special time of pastoral prayer. And so the assassination attempt on Trump happened a couple of weeks ago. I had just gotten home from vacation with my family, and Stephen texted me. He said, "Hey, did you hear the news?" And I was afraid something happened in their personal life that he was waiting to tell me because he had been on vacation. I was like, well, let me go on the news and just see what. Yeah. And it turns out it was the Trump assassination. I'm like, okay, here we go. But I'm not thankful that someone tried to murder a presidential nominee. But in the providence of God, I was thankful for the opportunity that in our pastoral prayer, we got to pray for unity in the body, certainly, despite differences. And so, because I know there are some very contentious issues going on in the world today that are our members have some different views on. And so it was an opportunity to preach unity. And then the second one, it's interesting. I had lunch with another pastor friend of mine. So actually Sarah's pastors, Drew and Andy from Oak Forest Anglican. I had lunch with them yesterday, and Drew told me that he's a recently published author, and the thesis of his book is that the way we reach the culture today is through practicing hospitality. Mm-hmm. And so that really resonated with what we're trying to do in our church. And so, for example, one of our neighbors found out that, as we've gotten to know them, that the husband grew up kind of going to church, but something happened. He's not really sure what, but his sense, they never went back to church. And basically, he hasn't looked back. And he was telling Stephen one time at a Christmas party or something that we were throwing, he was kind of sharing basically that, like what you articulated, that he kind of sees all pastors as like these Joel Osteen prosperity gospel types. And so Stephen got to tell him, kind of our heartbeat as a church. Well, Jennifer and I got to have him and his family over for dinner the other night. And the conversation didn't necessarily go anywhere overtly spiritual, but one of my prayers for that time with them in our home is that if his category of a pastor is someone who's only seeking to take from others for their own benefit, that hopefully us opening our home and being generous with our home, providing a meal, et cetera, might be just one of those things that's used by the Lord along the way that might soften hearts and open minds to the gospel.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the pastors with the biggest reach are the worst pastors, right? So it's kind of, there's like this inverse thing where like the pastors of smaller churches probably tend to have the most integrity, and you at least have access. Like you can at least see, like, are these people who live, what they preach, but but they don't have millions of followers and TV deals and stuff. So I understand I understand a lot of what the ex-evangelicals say in terms of their like critiques, and we've done whole episodes about this. But it's I don't know that I always agree with their solution, which tend to be like this kind of liberal version of Christianity that's not really Christianity. It's like you can be a traditional conservative evangelical without all that silly baggage of the asking for money and Trump worship and stuff like that. Okay, well, last topic here. The basic topic is homelessness, but it's sort of becoming a cultural issue again because the moment that Kamala announced her presidency, there was going to be opposition research. There's going to be people pouring back through her Twitter feed, looking at what she did as a senator and as a DA and as an AG in California and all of that. And so this was a tweet that came up. This is all the way from 2019, where the Las Vegas City Council is slated to vote on an ordinance that would make it illegal to camp or sleep on the streets in parts of the city. Kamala Harris, then senator, responded, "Criminalizing the homeless is not the answer. Instead, the federal government must partner with local communities like Las Vegas to lift folks out of homelessness. My bill in the Senate invests $13 billion in housing and health care for the homeless." And then Will Chamberlain, who's a kind of a center-right, he was a DeSantis supporter, for example, so not a huge Trump guy. But anyway, he's an attorney, has a bit of a following on Twitter. He said, "Kamala Harris opposes public camping bans because she wants you to be surrounded by drug use, crime, and public defecation whenever you step foot in a major American city." So he's, not really holding back. But, as Christians, it's kind of like with immigration. Frequently progressive Christians will more or less take the position that if you are a Christian, then you basically have to be in favor of human migration, which means you have the right to essentially go into any other nation and have your human rights, I guess, taken care of. And then the same seems to be kind of true of homelessness, where like you have a right as a human being to sort of squat anywhere you want, to sort of live anywhere you want, that public places are yours for the taking. So this is obviously an issue as, rents go up, drug use goes up. We do not have, I would argue, I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but I would argue we do not have adequate mental health care in a lot of states, so people aren't getting the help that they need, so they end up burning out every family member they have. They end up on the streets, and they end up, in tents. Not far from our home, not far from this church, was a massive campground, basically. Houston finally went in and said no camping is allowed. That's illegal to do it under bridges or under overpasses, etc. So that got moved out. I don't know where those people went, but they just went to another place. So that seems to be happening in Houston. You have encampments, and they get moved, and then they get moved, and then they get moved. But there's really nowhere for them to go. If you don't say that they're committing crimes, anyway, to get back to what she said, criminalizing the homeless. Homelessness per se is not a crime. It's not a crime to not have a house. What is a crime, though, is vagrancy, trespassing, open drug use, public nudity, for example, defecating on sidewalks. Those are crimes. But they're more or less chosen today in almost every major American city. That might be a slight exaggeration, but I don't think so. They're more or less look the other way. So, I have my own version of the solution, but I'm curious as to if you guys, if y'all have any thoughts about it, as Christians in particular, because we do want to look at this from a Christian worldview, if y'all have any thoughts on this.
Yeah. So to start with, I don't support open borders. Just want to put that out there.
Okay.
But
I didn't mean to say that you did. Yeah.
No, but I think you brought up the point that they have to go somewhere, right? So if we make it illegal to sleep on public property, and trespassing is illegal, and they don't have a home, I guess the only alternative is for them to stay awake for the foreseeable future, right? And that's not real, right?
Right.
So I just don't see it as a real solution. They're going to go somewhere else. It's not a solution to the problem, unless just locking them up in prison or in jail perpetually is the solution we're going for. But I don't see that as a realistic long-term solution. I think too often we focus too much on the homeless instead of asking why they ended up homeless in the first place. I think a lot of that comes down to we probably need about 3 million more houses than we have or something like that. And if we had more places to live, then the price of housing would come down. In California, you have all these people who want to live there, but you only have so many places to live. So you need to build more places. Unfortunately, there's a not in my backyard problem. So we need apartments or condos, right?
Or tiny homes. I read a thing the other day where they'd built a whole lot of tiny homes and they sold out before they even were on the market almost.
But I think there's this not in my backyard problem. Everybody supports that, but do that somewhere else. Don't do that close to me.
Yeah, Katy would be a good place.
Right, yeah. And
Dallas.
Dallas is a good place. But you run into that problem where there's, people want to live in the city. There's only so much room. You can only have so much suburban sprawl. And so the price of housing gets too high, and then people just can't afford a place to live anymore. So that's the problem I think we need to solve.
And the services tend to be downtown. Where we are, we're surrounded by 5 homeless services, Search and Salvation Army and Lord of the Streets and many more besides I'm not thinking of. So, and way back in our archive is a conversation we did have about homelessness with several folks involved. So you can go, if you go back maybe 3 years or so, you could probably find that. But no, I agree. In fact, there's a great O. Henry story. He wrote The Gift of the Magi, short story author, and I'll just summarize it very quickly. There's a guy who was homeless in New York and turn of the last century, and all he wanted to do was go to jail because it was cold. And he was like, I've got to get arrested for loitering, so that I can go to jail. And so everywhere he went, the cops would just, look the other way, or they'd say, move on. And so he kept, he's like, I want to go to jail. He tried to steal, he tried to eat at a restaurant without paying the bill. And the owner of the restaurant was like, it's fine, it's on me, and he tried to steal someone's purse and they felt bad for him. Anyway, but one night he stands in front of a church while the organist is there practicing at night and playing the most beautiful hymns he'd ever heard. And it brings back memories of his childhood, and he starts to weep, and he has this profound experience of turning his life around. And right then a cop comes up to him and says, hey buddy, you're loitering, let's go to jail. Anyway, great story. You should find it and read it because the prose is much better than I can say, but sorry for that. But I think the Michael Schellenberger, who's in California, has written a lot about this approach. His argument is basically, if you're committing crimes, okay, like petty theft, or drug abuse or camping, okay, you have to go to jail for those crimes. Or if there's an underlying problem of mental health or addiction, then you go to a place where you can get that help. We don't have those places. It's that middle place that we don't have. We used to have asylums, for people, and they got exposed. it's a cliche, but I mean, I blame One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as these terrible places that treated people badly. Yeah. And so then it's like, we have to shut these down because there are these awful places, and we're going to privatize, just like kind of the foster system is the privatization of orphanages. Yeah. Terrible things happen at orphanages. So, well, let me tell you, terrible things happen in foster homes too. And then there's some great people like Mace and Jennifer how many, y'all fostered how many?
We fostered 10, adopted one.
Yeah. But, there are abuses in all these systems, but the privatization I don't think has worked because there does need to be, and it is humane and Christian to have this third place where people can get the mental health that they need and the sobriety that they need. But you do not have, this is what I would say as a Christian and as a citizen of this country and this city and state, you do not have a right to be intoxicated in the public. Mm-hmm. You do not have a right to occupy public grounds. That is not a human right. You do not have a right to be mentally unwell on the streets, or to litter, or to loiter, or to trespass. Those are, if you tolerate those things as being kind of fundamental human rights, we don't really have a social contract anymore. And what it ends up doing is it punishes, all those people who follow the rules, to the nth degree, and then at other people who don't follow the rules, it's like it leads to this total frustration that the contract is just totally broken. So I don't see any reason why we can't have a third space that treats people with the help that they need. And it may be that they never leave that place. Yeah. But it's better. Isn't that better than them being on the street wrapped in a blanket with nothing on, which I see on a daily basis? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I wrong? What am I missing?
Well,
and I think it'd be cheaper
necessarily
too.
Wrong. Another topic I don't claim to have all the answers for, but I do find it interesting that these. So one of the talking points that frustrates me sometimes, and some Christian leaders that I have a ton of respect for and have learned a ton from have parroted these things, that this kind of third wayism, that that if you look at Christian ethics, we support things like not murdering innocent lives, traditional views of sexuality and gender, which sound very conservative, but the Bible, you mentioned earlier that the Bible seems to support these ethics of care for the sojourner and care for the poor, which sound like liberal policies. And so, there's this thought out there that Christians, don't fit into either party. And I don't think we fit into either major political party perfectly, but it's kind of this third wayism. What frustrates me about that is there's a built-in assumption that conservatives don't care for the poor or for the migrant. And I certainly there are. But I think there are many people that do, and it's a disagreement on policy, right? The disagreement is on policy. All that to say, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that these places that have these progressive policies that are supposed to be the ones compassionate and supposed to be the ones that help the most seem to be the ones that deal with problems like this the most. So, for example, California, according to the statistics that I found, the state of California represents 11.7% of the overall population of the United States. However, 27.5% of the homeless population lives in California. So it seems to be drawing these people and not actually pulling them out of poverty. The other thought that came to my mind as y'all were talking is it circles back to your question, Evan, about why do we need more churches? So something I stumbled across years ago that had a really profound effect on me was a pastor by the name of Mez McConnell. He oversees a ministry called 20 Schemes in Scotland. And if you don't know what schemes are, they're basically like the equivalent of the projects here in America. And so it's this ministry that's focused on church planting in these poorest of the poor neighborhoods, drug-filled, crime-ridden neighborhoods in Scotland. And he's a part of this ministry because that's where he grew up. And one thing that he said that really struck with me, he was like, growing up in the schemes in Scotland, the wealthy church down the street would send these people and they would feel really good about themselves because they handed out clothes or food or whatever, and well-intentioned and good. And they would get to go back and feel good about themselves, but nothing ever actually changed. He said, if you want to help the poor, plant healthy churches. And I think absolutely, to Evan's point, there is a place for professional help. But to your point, Cody, as well, and Evan both, I think, is homelessness in many ways is just the symptom, not the underlying problem. That if we want to really help people get like pulled out of poverty, it's going to take time and it's going to be messy. And that's exactly what the church here is here to do. The local church, that we're supposed to come around one another. When you look in the New Testament, the ethic of caring for the poor, it was always the poor among the believers, that the believers were caring for one another. And so, again, don't claim to have all the answers, but I do think that that is another reason why we absolutely do need more churches, certainly here inside the Loop where there is still a homelessness issue.
By the way, just today, Governor Newsom in California ordered state agencies to address encampments in their communities with urgency and dignity. So after years and years of, doing nothing, and I have a feeling this will probably amount to nothing as well, but it seems like, hey, now that, Vice President Harris is running for president, we need to kind of say that, we don't want people to, I don't know, this is why they're doing it, but it's almost like we don't want to look like we don't care about this issue, because this is an issue that Trump is running on, clearly, the degradation of our American cities, our great American cities. And it's known that in a lot of our cities, people don't feel safe. And San Francisco is just like a wasteland. I mean, you have people who spend $1.5 million on their home and they don't go out at night. And, they have to step over, maybe dead bodies on their way home. And there's the Google Maps with all the poop on the streets. It's like, it's like a Mad Max world or something. And I agree with Trump that this is the kind of thing that we should not tolerate, and other cities don't tolerate this. Would not be tolerated in, say, Singapore, for example. They have other limits of freedom, perhaps, but they have clean cities. So I don't know. I just this idea though that we just kind of leave people to their natural state, and that's compassion. No, that's not compassion. Now, I have a cousin who's an architect, and he and I will talk about this quite a bit. A lot of the communist Eastern Bloc, architecture, the brutalist architecture, as it's called, is precisely called that because it's so ugly and inhumane. And that's not a good solution either. So just building a building and cramming people in it, that's kind of what the projects are. Yeah. But of course, building itself is so extremely expensive. And in California, they're putting homeless people in houses or in rooms that, are like $500,000 each to build. So, maybe we need to figure out how to build things for cheaper, but now we're talking about inflation. Now we're talking about all the reasons that everything is so expensive and regulation. Yes. And immigration does put a major, like you said, we need 3 million homes. Well, yeah, if there are 5 to 10 to 20 million people more here than there were 4 years ago, as a result of an open border policy, well, we all have to live somewhere. So, so I think that's kind of strange. So anyway, I don't know. I do think it's a major issue. The thing about this issue is that it's not that there are that many homeless people. It really isn't. But just seeing just one, say somebody wants to visit my church. Okay. So they come into this part of town and they see one person who's clearly homeless in a terrible state of mind. It's an impression for the whole day. Or that's all they think about when they think about this neighborhood or coming to my church. Oh my gosh, that neighborhood is so terrible. And so I'm sitting here trying to, do a faithful, inner city ministry. And this is what I'm up against. People don't want to come to this neighborhood because the city the city believes the best thing for that person is to have their freedom on the street. And I think that's insane. I don't think it's Christian. I don't think it helps anybody. I don't think it honors the dignity of the people who live here and pay taxes to live here, because they have rights too. And anyway.
Yeah,
so.
Like I say, I agree with you. If we have some kind of third way, like you talked about, if we just make it illegal and pretend it went away.
San Antonio supposedly has this place. I've not researched it, but what I've heard is that City of Houston people are really studying what they're doing. Yeah. It's some kind of third space that's very dignified, but it's kind of like you have to either go here or you go to jail. Yeah. That's my impression of it. I need to learn more about that, but
it sounds like a plan.
Anyway, well, a lot to talk about these days. Thank you guys for joining us. Joe, it sounds like we all need to be following you on TikTok if we have TikTok accounts. So where can people find you?
Me?
Yeah.
Cody Pogue.
Oh, I called you Joe. I'm sorry.
I was like, who's Joe?
Who's Joe? Well, I'm sorry. Yes.
Cody Pogue on TikTok. I think it's just my name. I think it's just straight, no dot or anything. Just Cody Pogue on TikTok.
All right. So. And your name is Mace, right?
My name is Mace.
Okay.
Yes,
Woo!
right.
I got that right. Jeez, I'm embarrassed. Okay.
Well done.
All right. Where can people find you?
So personally, I'm not cool enough for TikTok. I am on Twitter and Facebook. I don't think there's too many Mace Perez's out there, so you can probably just search my name and find me there. And then our church is thejourneyhouston.org.
And I'm Evan McClanahan. I think that's my name anyway. I might have forgotten it. And I'm at firstlutheranflhouston.org. Of course, go to theologybythepint.org to learn all about us and our events and the leadership team and everything else you'd want to know and how to donate. And anyway, until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.